need men to join this thing. That's all we need.
It's always the challenge, mate, with this stuff.
Okay, so we are live. So obviously a warm welcome to everyone who's joined us, and much appreciate Brad Chilcott's time. Brad is the Executive Director of White Ribbon Australia, and Brad, I greatly appreciate you taking time out of I know you're a very busy man, traveling all across the country, and of course also a family man, so you're trying to juggle everything. So thank you for giving us a bit of your time tonight. And Brad and I were just talking a bit earlier that we're going to look at doing an in-person event. Brad actually wanted to do an in-person event, and then we got the snap lockdown, and I panicked and I said, let's not do that. Let's wait till. So you were actually right. We should have done the in-person event, but everything's meant to be. So tonight we're just going to have a bit of a chat, a bit of a talk on a topic which certainly has not left society. It's something which is still very prevalent, and something which is a work that requires everyone's help. Not just those in the advocacy roles and those working for organizations, but each and every single human being that can make a difference. But I think tonight I wanted to talk to you about obviously the work you do, White Ribbon Australia. Of course, there was a bit of a lull when they closed down, and there was sort of a restart, and I'd love to hear about that. And I guess we can just go through it. And of course, anyone who's on live, either on Facebook or on Zoom, if you have any questions, just type them in the chat box, and I'll keep in the loop and bring them to Brad's attention if there's any questions that are been put to us. So once again, thank you, Brad, and of course, thank you everyone else for taking some of your time out tonight.
No worries. Thank you, Rabbi, for inviting me to be with you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in person and having that event we discussed. I'd also just like to say that although I usually live on Kaurna land, right now I'm on Wadjuk land in Perth, what we now know as Perth, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. And every time we have an event like this and talk about domestic violence and inequality, it's important to remember that First Nations people in Australia disproportionately experience those things. The statistics, from white and mainstream Australians experiencing violence compared to First Nations women are just astronomical. And so we should also commit to working together with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians to solve these issues too.
Absolutely, so crucial. So tell us a little bit of your journey, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, well, White Ribbon Australia, we relaunched in June 2020, so we're back in business for 9 months, and really, if you've seen the news over the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's no better time for White Ribbon to be back, because men really need to step up and take responsibility for the experiences of women in our nation. We can explore that a bit more, but myself, in my past, I was a pastor of a Christian church, and I had a bit of a unique church culture, I guess. Our tagline was a community of activists. So right from the beginning of that, I guess, faith community, we existed to not, just have services on a Sunday, but to mobilize our people for making a difference in the world, and to not measure, I guess, success or faith or whatever by the service, but by your life service to others. And so I've been involved in lots of different kinds of advocacy over the years, and the key one, I guess, came out of that faith community. It was called Welcoming Australia. So I've spent 10 years since I started Welcoming Australia, which was about people seeking asylum, refugees, and all kinds of migrants, and how we build a community where everyone can belong, contribute and thrive regardless of faith or culture or background. And so I've spent a lot of time doing interfaith work, working with Jewish and Muslim and Buddhist and Christian communities to mobilize together for a more welcoming and inclusive country. I've done some work along the way in mental health and in campaign for Australians foreign aid. I've done some social housing work, and along that journey in Adelaide, I started something called the Family and Domestic Violence Advocacy Network. And the idea of that was to bring together, I guess, all the well-meaning organisations like White Ribbon and Zonta and Seroptimist and faith and business groups that wanted to see an end to family and domestic violence, but bring them together into a conversation with women's safety services and those on the front line, to not just, I guess, raise awareness about the horrors of men's violence against women, but to collectively, draw power together to create meaningful change. So that's my background. And then White Ribbon, forgive me if I'm just rambling and you want to jump in, Rabbi, anytime, but
I've never been known to be shy to jump in. So
great. So White Ribbon went into liquidation in late 2019 for a whole lot of reasons, but including, obviously it went bankrupt, so there was some financial issues, but there was controversy around some of the ambassadors, around some financial decisions and who they'd taken money from, around a whole range of issues. But in the end, really, many people had lost faith with White Ribbon because they had started to think it was tokenistic, that it was kind of celebrating men for not using violence, giving men a pedestal to feel proud of themselves because they weren't violent, rather than that just being, baseline human decency. And also a bit of a conversation around millions of dollars being raised for White Ribbon and what that money was actually doing to make a difference. So then they started advertising for this role, the new executive director, and I thought, I'm not sure I want that gig. This organisation is not rescuable. But to cut the story short, I had a conversation with Communicare, who are the new custodians, and in fact, they had, I guess, some of the same analysis as me about what needed to be different if White Ribbon was to come back and to survive. And so, and not just to survive, but to make a real difference. So we had a lot of conversations, and I talked about some of the key changes that I wanted to make, and they were up for those changes. And so I said yes, and here we are today. And so really happy to outline some of those differences for you, if that's helpful, or answer any questions that you have.
Fantastic. Yeah, no. So I think it would be interesting to hear, because I was quite obviously interested in White Ribbon Australia at the time, and it was quite confronting when it shut down, and to read some of the news articles around it, and I'm glad that it's resurfaced and like you said, with a new perspective, a new way forward, and hopefully it can do great work. And it certainly sounds like you've got your work cut out for you, but you look like you're up to the challenge, just talking to you for a few minutes,
Well, I hope so. Thank you, Rabbi. I think a few things. So, number one, White Ribbon had really lost the trust of the women's movement and the women's safety sector. And although White Ribbon is a primary prevention organisation that exists to engage men and boys, if the very people that you're trying to make life better for have lost trust in you and don't think that you're useful to, helping create a safer future for women in Australia, then there's a problem. And I should say that the very last CEO of White Ribbon, Delia Donovan, and her team had started rebuilding some of that trust, but it was too far gone by that point to rescue the organisation. But one of the things I said from the beginning that to Communicare and since I've started is that I wanted to make sure that our relationship is with the women's movement, with the women's safety sector, is one of listening and learning, and primarily of humility. That White Ribbon doesn't show up as the men here to save the day, or not thinking that we know better about how to create a more equal and safe future for for women in Australia, but that we're here to listen, to learn, to collaborate, to work together, and to and to, I guess, be willing to listen to their advice and expertise, because the reality is that decades ago when White Ribbon began, and when these conversations began, domestic violence and men's violence against women was in the shadows. It was secret. It wasn't spoken about. It was family business, not public business. And feminists and female activists really did the hard work to get that out of the shadows. In fact, the people that started White Ribbon in Australia were female leaders. And to think that men then get to pat themselves on the back and stand on a pedestal and say, look up to me because I'm not violent, is not the right approach. And so we've made it really clear that our value is humility, and taking away a bit of that bad man, good man dichotomy that I think is actually not helpful, because what we all need to do is yes, we can say all men don't use violence, but all men have prioritized our own opinions at times. We've prioritized our desires at times. We've prioritized our ambitions at times. And even if you want to have an argument with me about that, we've definitely benefited from the privilege, the power and privilege that we have as men in this society. And so what we need to do, and what women need from us, is that we have a honest and humble reflection on how we have benefited from our privilege, how we've used that to our own advantage, and how we have not often given the women in our lives the same value on their opinions, ambitions, desires as we have our own. And if all of us as men can do that first, then we'll go a long way to starting to undermine the violence that we also want to see changed in the long run. So there's like a lot of I guess structural and programmatic changes we've made to White Ribbon as well, but that's one of the key ones, that we're not saying here's a bunch of good men to get on a stage and give a speech. We're saying, how about all of us as men reflect on our own behavior, even simple things like when tensions rise in our house, do people feel afraid of us? And is that the way it should be? Is our decision making shared? And again, those things about whose opinions, ambitions and desires are most valued. If we just started there as men, we would start to change our society.
Brilliant. I think I love exactly what you're saying. I think it's spot on, because I think and I certainly had conversations at times with, certainly ambassadorship, and I'm not sure if that's continuing in some form or shape, but I think that concept of lauding and praising men, because they're not, because they are ambassadors of this, like you said, it sort of took the wrong focus, the wrong spotlight, where the spotlight should really be on the actions that need to be changed, and like you said, the humility that comes with that, because that's the only way there's going to be change, is if people are prepared to listen to those who've been affected and impacted on by the violence. Now, there's a question that so many people always put to me, and I don't know where, how you sort of address this on a day-to-day basis, but whenever we have this conversation, I find I get messages from men saying, "Oh, what about violence against us?" And I've often explained, I said, that could very well be true, and there's certainly men who have been abused and have violence against them. But I said, you keep drowning out the willingness to change by keeping that question on the forefront every time we discuss this topic. Now, I don't know how you sort of go about addressing that. I'm sure you get this question all the time as well.
All the time. And firstly, it's very important to say that all forms of violence need to be eliminated. So violence against people of any gender needs to be addressed, and no one is denying that. But there's two other responses that I think are important as well. Number one, just in regards to White Ribbon, we exist to eliminate men's violence against women, and that doesn't mean other forms of violence don't need to be eliminated. It's just that this is what we exist for. It's like saying you run the Heart Foundation because you want to end heart disease. It doesn't mean you don't think kidney disease is bad. Of course you do, but you exist for a particular purpose. So that's important to note. But secondly, I think it's often a way of deflecting self-reflection. And if your first response to ending men's violence against women is, well, men experience violence, then you haven't self-reflected too much on the issue. And one of the reasons that we focus on men's violence against women is that the statistics are just damning. I mean, firstly, the 95% of all violence, whether it's perpetrated against women or men, is perpetrated by men, 95% of all violence. 1 woman a week is murdered by their current or former male partner. 1 in 3 women experience domestic violence in their lifetime. And 85% of women experience sexual harassment. Now, those statistics are not the same for men, and that doesn't mean those men who experience sexual harassment or violence are any less important, but those statistics are not the same. 1 man a week is not being killed by their female partner. And this is why we are focused on this area. And if you think about that, 85% of women experience sexual harassment. That is basically 9 out of 10 women that you see, the women in your life. Now, would you say, we often talk about how many women have been sexually assaulted, been raped, been sexually harassed, and we all probably know a woman who has been, but how many of us know a man who admits to being a sexual harasser or a sexual perpetrator of sexual assault? And if those numbers are so large, and they are, then many of us men are sexual harassers, are doing acts of violence. We all don't know anyone who is, obviously, because we don't want to admit it, but the statistics prove it. And so it's men that need to think about our behaviour and our excuse of people in our lives' behaviour and our contribution to, I guess, maintaining the cultures of disrespect and inequality that allow that kind of behaviour to continue.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you've answered that question brilliantly. I think, also just curious to hear your perspective or thoughts on it. I mean, I know that as a rabbi, of course, we do have a platform. We do have an ability to stand, take a stand at times, and to, promote varying different causes. And I think, like you said, I've with the women's marches that have just been occurring, I think there's been a lot of media attention and, of course, a lot of negative attention against it, saying, these are just feminists, or these are, crazy women, etc. And I think all these times when they just try to drown out the point of it, I think it just sets you back. You take one step forward and it just takes you back a number of steps. And I think what you said is so correct. We should address the elephant in the room. It doesn't mean that we don't address everything else in the room as well at times, and through varying other mechanisms. But I think certainly as a parent, as a rabbi, as a male, I think we do have a responsibility to change that culture, and I think that starts with our kids. So I know that we certainly try. With our coming of age program, we talk about this. Does White Ribbon sort of focus on younger education and sort of trying to change the way we think? Because that really, I think, that's something which is society perpetuates, and then it's like the vicious circle in a way.
Yeah, so White Ribbon is, we call it in the business, a primary prevention organisation, and what that means is, so we talk about in family and domestic violence there being primary prevention, early intervention, which is, I guess, trying to stop violence from happening at the time, and then there are tertiary prevention, which is protecting people who are escaping violence, and but primary prevention in particular is changing the culture that creates the things that you mentioned, the attitudes and the entitlement and the idea, I guess, even in men, that violence is an option for using against their partner. And I noticed in the chat someone said violence isn't just physical, and I think that's a really important thing to note. Actually, White Ribbon has been, and I'll come back to primary prevention and kids in a minute, but White Ribbon has been really focused on promoting and educating and also campaigning on coercive control, which is...
Oh, we lost you for a second.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Oh, I don't know. Really focused on talking about coercive control, which is actually all the non-physical forms of violence that men use to dominate and maintain control over their partners. And so, yeah, violence is not just physical. It can be financial, emotional. It can be isolating you from family and friends. It can be, surveilling your phone and and making just the decisions about your life rather than giving you agency to do that. So that's really important. But what we are about is changing the culture that allows disrespect to thrive. So it means with young people explaining what respectful relationships look like and are. But more broadly, it's actually about normalizing respectful relationships and denormalizing, sexual harassment and disrespect and inequality, and the idea that that men have a preference over women in a whole range of ways. Sometimes people talk about it almost the way that they talk about, smoking, for example. It used to be very cool to smoke. It used to be very cool to wolf whistle women in the street, or to, show off about your sexual exploits or whatever. We're actually trying to make inequality and disrespect and sexual harassment uncool, so that anyone that engages in that kind of activity is not excused by their male friends, or that experience for women is no longer minimized, but that actually everyone just says that's not on. Those jokes are not on. That the way that you're expressing inequality in your business or your workplace or your sporting club is not on, and we don't tolerate that in our society anymore.
Fantastic. I think that's a really great strategy to really just stamp it out wherever you see it. It's just all these little fires all around you, and you got to put them out. I mean, I something occurred a number of years ago, and I posted about it on social media, where I was at the gym and I went on the Stairmaster, and this guy walked past me and said, "Stop doing a chicks or stop doing a girls exercise. Go to the real weights."
Yeah.
Remember, I didn't let him get away with it. I actually called him out on it and had a bit of an argument, and then it sort of. But I remember reading a lot of the comments from women who were really happy to hear that, because I think, and again, you don't want to be caught in trying to praise yourself for doing it, because that's just what is the right. It's correct, you know what I mean. That's what you're supposed to do. But
yeah,
it did sort of open up my mind a lot more to see that so many women related to that type of talk, and as men, we probably don't even hear it half the time because we're not subjected to it in the way that women are. So I think what you said is right. It's making that unpopular. That's uncommon.
Yeah, and the more of us that do step up and call it out, like you said, it doesn't make us a legend, but it is important, because the more of us that do it, the more it normalizes the calling it out, and the more it denormalizes the behavior in the first place. It's even the same when you see someone disrespecting their wife, or continually talking over the top of women in the room, or you're in a meeting and someone assumes that the woman in the room is going to take the notes, and all of those little things that over and over again reinforce that men have the priority and women have to step into the background. We can call that stuff out really, really easily, and we should, and that changes what is accepted as normal.
Yeah. Now, I mean, obviously, there's degrees of severity of it, and from the least severe has to be addressed, has to be changed. But just in for the purpose of this chat as well, I mean, I work as a volunteer police chaplain, and I often speak to police, and unfortunately, it's so troubling to hear that so much of their work is responding to domestic violence calls, and
Yeah.
in every community. So I'm just, I don't know if you have any thoughts on, where the police play a role and sort of what we can do to support the police in their work.
I mean, I'll say a couple of things. Firstly, I think where the reason we're focused on the coercive control piece of this puzzle that I raised earlier is that it changes our understanding of domestic violence from an incident-based approach, as in police show up at a house, who hit who in this particular moment, and who can prove that this person hit that person first, or etc. It changes that idea of domestic violence being an incident of physical assault to understanding it as a pattern of behaviour, and that changes the way police interact with a couple when they're called out. It changes the way society understands family and domestic violence. It changes the way a call out is investigated. And it actually much more accurately reflects women's experience, who often say that the physical abuse was not not the worst part of our relationship. It was the control that was associated with it. And indeed, if you think about the Hannah Clark's murder and her children in Brisbane, which has been at the forefront of our minds over the last year because of its public and horrific nature. It was actually the first act of physical violence in that relationship. The rest of it had been coercive control, and it was only when that control was finally taken away that that man tipped over into that horrific form of violence. So there's that. I think shifting our understanding from an incident to a pattern would really help in terms of the way police engage. Secondly, again, White Ribbon is about prevention. And I guess I just wanted to share our approach to this. What we believe is that although men's violence is not unique to any community, the solutions are, as in the way we prevent men becoming violent, or if we turn that around, the way we change the culture in different communities towards gender equality and towards respectful relationships is going to be different in a synagogue to a church to a mosque. It's going to be different in a country town to a city. It's going to be different in a footy club to a factory. It's going to be different in a Indian community to a Nepalese community to a Kenyan community living here in Australia. And so our focus is on a program we're calling community action groups, where we're asking people in different communities, however you see community, whatever you think a community is, your faith community, your multicultural community, your sporting community, to come together and then to develop community response plans that are uniquely designed by your community for your community to prevent men's violence. And I know this isn't directly related to police, but I think that our role in this work is to hopefully mean that police are not called out as often as they are, because we're working community by community, workplace by workplace, to prevent violence in a way that people will, respond to and listen to. Boys in a non-white, non-Christian community are going to not listen to me when I show up and say, hey, lads, be different. They need a different spokesperson, a different narrative, a different conversation that's culturally appropriate and theologically appropriate for their context, and etc. And so that's what we're really trying to coordinate, is different community action groups coming together across the country to have unique responses to men's violence in each community.
I think it's really clever because you're right. I mean, you need to target each community for its own demographic, its own sort of, as you said, it's different approaches. But I'm just curious. It's become quite popular, and I think it does help. But I'm not sure if there's any sort of statistics behind it, or if you've seen any success. Things like Men Shed, and where they try and allow men to not necessarily to change the meaning of what it means to be a man. Do you find these things are helpful? Do you think they're good approaches? And would community benefit from having women's groups and men's groups, or does that sort of continue the stigma or the differences?
No, I think they can be very helpful. I think one of the stereotypes, I guess, about men is that we don't share our emotions and our feelings very well. We don't disclose what we're going through, and feel like we have, like, I was with 40 boys actually last week in Tasmania and asked them to describe, what a man is, and they all said tough, doesn't cry, bottles up their emotions, in control. All of those stereotypes are actually more real than we would probably like to think. And then at the same time, they all said that they would love to have someone that they could talk stuff through with, so that it doesn't end up being bottled up and then ending up being expressed as violence and abuse. So I definitely think those programs can help, and that if men can be encouraged to share their experience and engage in conversations that assist their mental health, I think that can definitely be helpful. I think the challenge sometimes is that you get a bunch of dudes together who say that they want to chat, they end up reinforcing existing stereotypes and attitudes about gender and women. So I would say yes, they're very helpful in the right context and with the right people managing them.
Yeah, exactly. The right facilitation, and they're done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, because I mean, you don't want to create these groups and then they just do the opposite effect. Just perpetuate it even more.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have you heard men are hard done by, the courts are bad to men, the police are bad to men, like even you were saying earlier, these angry feminists marching in the street, or these angry women are giving men a bad name. So there is a challenge of when you get men together, that you don't let it go down that kind of rabbit hole to just reinforce existing bad attitudes.
It's my son. The Jewish school that he goes to. They have when the boy turns 13, they become religiously a man, and girls when they
Yeah,
turn 12. But the program that the school ran, they called it Man Up.
yeah,
To take, obviously man up in sport, but also man up. And they obviously gave it a whole new meaning, what it means to
yeah,
man up. And I found it fantastic. And I remember I spoke at the ceremony at the end, and I mentioned them. I said, I was so impressed with the program. We were teaching them values of respect and kindness and care and equality, and all the important values that you and I share. And I'm sure that everyone watching on this group, and many who hopefully will watch, can learn from, or are doing it already. Um, Look, I know I have no doubt that there would be people watching or listening that unfortunately are possibly going through it right now, going through
mm,
abuse or violence, and whether it's the emotional, the psychological, the controlling,
mm.
the aggressive. What's your advice to them right now?
Uh, Firstly, I guess to the rest of us, the first piece of advice is believe women all the time. If someone discloses to you that they're experiencing violence or abuse, our first and most important response is to believe and to listen. And then to people that are experiencing any form of violence and abuse, the first port of call is really calling 1-800-RESPECT and getting some advice from 1-800-RESPECT. There could be trusted people in your life that you can share your experience with. That's an important step to take as well. And of course, if you're experiencing violence right now or in an emergency, call 000 and get the police out. I think what we're learning in the public conversation over the last few weeks is that it's important to speak up and let people know what's going on. There is help available. you want to do that in a safe way and in the right time, and no one else can tell you what that time is or when that moment is. But there is help available, and 1-800-RESPECT is a great place to start. And also, if you're a man on this call at the moment and you're worried about using violence in your relationship, then Men's Referral Service is the place to call. They can give you free and confidential support to, go on a journey to not use violence in your relationship. And that's just good to know, because you may have never used violence before, but you can feel that things are getting stressful or you're not managing your emotions well, and there's someone that you can talk to as well.
Yeah, that's very important. I think, thank you for saying that. I mean, the sad reality is, and I'm sure you've dealt with this more than me, because obviously that's your space at the moment. But and I, as you said, I encourage anyone who's either feels like they might be a perpetrator or are currently perpetrating to get the help they need, and those who are sadly on the receiving end, to use the services out there. But the sad reality is that sometimes you do get caught up even with these helpful services, and as I said, I've had to support some women through that, and it's a challenge. And it's, I think, society, besides for calling out the violence and for asking women to speak out and for men to speak out, I think we need to also ensure that the support services improve. And I know that I know they're trying, and I know that it's not always easy, and sometimes it's you get to work through the court systems and all that. It's that itself is so challenging, and sometimes may make people feel like there's no point even trying. So if I could be of any support, or you could be of any support, or anyone, to try and change that, and make it a bit more seamless, a bit more user friendly, I think it will help us address some of the real serious issues that are occurring right now, in addition to, of course, all the educational side of it, and like you said, prevention.
I completely agree with that, and that's another reason we're working on this coercive control thing. But then there's real challenges in the family court. And then if you talk to any women's safety service, they're so underfunded in terms of meeting the demand. And governments will say, well, the demand is endless, and so do you want an endless bucket of money? But the reality is there's women and children who need to find safety, and they can't find a safe house to live in. They don't have the financial security given to them to be able to, leave a violent relationship. Many women in workplaces don't have paid family violence leave. So there are so many structural and funding reasons that women end up having to stay in violent relationships and not find safety when they should be able to. So we're definitely, I guess that's one of the key shifts in this new White Ribbon, is that we're here to advocate alongside women, and to not just have our supporters, say that men's violence is bad, but to raise their voice and their collective power to see some of those systems and government priorities change.
Brilliant. So I don't think there's enough work that could be done to change it. So I think anyone who has any influence, whoever might be listening, or we come across, that may be able to influence or to provide further or to support further. As you said, there's it's sadly an ongoing need, and the list is just getting longer. The question, I guess, maybe we sort of coming to an end of our chat, because I do want to have you back in person. But if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them. I know everyone's comfortable to ask questions in this environment, but you can send it to me anonymously if you wanted to not necessarily have everyone see what questions you ask. I'll be happy to address them to Brad. But Brad, look, there has been a lot done. I said, look at even my son's program, just as an example. Are we seeing that this is changing? Are we seeing that work? Because the last thing we want is for anyone to feel that it's futile, that it's just, children are seeing certain behaviors in homes that, they're not learning the right way from certain men. And so that's how they get raised. At what point are we going to see this eliminated? I mean, do you feel like if you could live to 500 years old, you'll be working here in 500 years? Like, how do you feel personally?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think statistically things are not turning around. There's increase, like even just during the pandemic, there was an increase in family and domestic violence incidents. If you ask women, the sexual harassment hasn't turned around. So on that front, I think it, like you say, it can be depressing to think about that. Are we still going to be talking about it in 500 years? But by the same token, other statistics have turned around in society where people no longer accept gender inequality as the norm. They are starting to, the numbers are shifting in the way that we respond to questions around whether it's right for, like I said earlier, for men's preferences and ambitions and desires to be prioritized. When there is sexual harassment in workplaces, or some Eddie Maguire type says something dodgy on the radio, like the backlash is swift and massive. And that's different than it was 5 or 10 years ago. Like, actually, I even saw Daryl Summers, the old host of Hey Hey It's Saturday, was in the paper, in the news yesterday, because he's getting a new show, and he was even saying, we couldn't say any of the things on TV now that we used to say on Hey Hey It's Saturday. And that's actually good. That's a shift in society. And so I guess our hope is that equity, as Marilyn says, and equality, is that we're on a trajectory to get more of that. And I think the way that Brittany Higgins and Grace Tame and some of those others who are sharing their experiences now in public are doing that, continuing to shift the dial in the right direction. That again would not have been normal 5-10 years ago, even less maybe. And so I think things are shifting, and again, we need men to step up and get into that shift.
Yeah, I think just going back to what you said in the beginning, I think that's just so important, because you see this in other spaces, in other areas. We should applaud people for not being racist. It's like, no, it doesn't deserve a ban.
Yeah.
And I think in this space, and you said it so well in the beginning, that we've got to stop applauding people for not being violent, for men for not being violent, or for speaking up. That should be the standard.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I really look. I think, as you said, we can all do something, and I think you're obviously working at the forefront in this space. But every one of us can make a difference. Every one of us can make a small change in some way or the other. And I think all the men listening, and of course, like you also said in the beginning, and I like the way you addressed it, if any man is suffering or going through an abusive relationship, please don't take this conversation as saying you don't matter, or you shouldn't get help, of course. And I think, Brad, you said it clearly, they should get help, and there are organizations helping them. But it's like you said, it's addressing the one that's more prevalent at the moment, the one that's happening all the time. And so, yeah, look, I hope if this conversation was stressful to anyone, there are numerous places you can call. Lifeline, as you mentioned, 1-800-RESPECT. And certainly, reach out for help if you do feel that there's anything that's bothered you hearing tonight, either myself or Brad have said. But Brad, any closing remarks before we?
Thanks. I do. Just one thing. Thanks, Rabbi. You mentioned earlier the ambassador program, and we spoke about that. We did end that program as our first act, as the new White Ribbon. But we've replaced it with a program called Community Partners, and community partners can be people of any gender. So it's not just men, like it used to be for the ambassador program. And it's much less about, giving speeches and wearing ribbons. Happy for people to wear ribbons, of course, but it's less about that and more about how are you partnering with your community in an ongoing way to create change. And it's about that self-reflection and understanding your role in making a difference and changing the culture. So anyone that would like to take the first step to getting involved in White Ribbon, would love to invite you to become a community partner, men and women. I'll just put the website in the chat, but you can go to whiteribbon.org.au and register your interest in becoming a community partner. Anyone from rabbis to average punters in your synagogue can get involved. So we'd love to have you on board in that way.
I think that's such a. I love the change in terminology and attitude, and a community partner is really what we want. We want people to partner together in this, and to, as opposed to putting on your CV, I'm a White Ribbon ambassador, which I think as you said, it sort of didn't really address what needed to be addressed. So well done to you and your colleagues, for listening and taking the feedback, I guess, that the organization learned and that you've all taken in your personal lives to try and make change. So thank you to you for what you do, and to all the brave women that, as you said, set this all up, through the face of so much, I'm sure, just so much turmoil, and just really at a time when it was probably really, really scary to speak out. They're the ones who paved the way. So
that's right.
All of them. So
thank you.
Tonight.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation.
No, absolute pleasure. And again, it was great to talk to you. I love hearing the way sort of you address these things and think about these things. And as I said, I look forward to welcoming you in person, and hopefully we can do a nice evening to partner together and to
I'd love to
find more community partners that can help in this space. So I'm going to wish everyone a wonderful night. Just a little bit of a plug for our talk tomorrow night. Myself and a colleague of mine, Rabbi Chilcott from Elwood, will be talking about Passover and some of the things that people can learn about, inspiration around the Seder night. So that's tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, the same Zoom link. So Brad, enjoy your night, and travel safe, and hopefully you can get to spend a bit of time with your family.
I hope so.
Amongst all the work you've been doing, and wish everyone else a Chag Pesach, Kasher V'Sameach, a happy Passover, and please God, only safe and healthy week ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Rabbi. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Have a wonderful evening.
See you later.
All right.